Myself here. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm so glad to see so many regular names and faces in. Give me 1 second, and we'll have my camera on in just a bit. Hopefully, the audio doesn't give us any trouble when I turn the camera on, but that is a small price to pay with rural internet. But hey, life goes on, right? So, as you notice, we're not doing a discussion on international relations or geopolitics this week. And this is in part because, one, I want to make sure that whatever I talk about in regards to IR or the literature that we review or the news that we go over, I'm not going in half cocked. I'm not talking out of my ass, and I don't want to give you what I think is a poor presentation. I hate myself when I don't provide quality content, and so I don't want to engage in that kind of attitude or behavior. So I'm going to postpone it until next week when we have a proper discussion on some of the things that are important as to what's going on in the world. Plus, there's been some recent events going on that I think is worth discussing, but we have to let it a few days go down in that regard. So, yeah, no, it is very much live, ladies and gentlemen. Let me check and make sure that my echo cancellation's turned off. Okay, cool. All right, so one of the things I should start with, why on earth am I doing this video, or why I'm doing this live stream? And this goes back a few months ago when I had put out the video of my I Am 1776 essay, Everywhere at the End of the West. And I had gotten a few people with some feedback that I thought was pretty good and pretty fair on some ends. One came from Atop's the Cliffs Poetry, and I think Arthur Powell runs that, and I know he's been in the live chat and has replied to the things on Twitter before. And so he offered some very lengthy feedback that I was one day going to address on a Substack, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And then the other person who had provided some commentary and feedback was the Distributist. And as you all know, I have a lot of respect for Dave. He's a big reason as to why I started doing things like that. And the other thing was that I told him when he did his little review of the essay and some of his thoughts on it, the word that he had used is that there's too much nostalgia. And I told him in the comments that I was going to write or do a reply or post a Substack or a video or some thoughts on it. And that was months ago. And I have a Substack draft. It's literally open in the other tab that with some of my thoughts and notes on it. But I always start with doing my notes handwritten. So I keep little notepads everywhere that I go to review books. I've got more spiral notebooks with regards to the books that I read or things that I think about for potential videos. And when I started this channel a little over 2 years ago now, that's how I started. All my video scripts, all of my ideas for content and notes and ideas were going to be in the they were all handwritten. They weren't anything that was really too extreme. Let me make sure that I don't have any feedback playing here. But those were the things that I wanted to do. And so I wrote most of my notes on this little thing forever ago. And I thought that I'd reformat it for this conversation because I'm usually live on Saturdays. And why not have a discussion on that issue? And so the first part, of course, is why am I doing this video? And that's primarily to give myself the opportunity to have some feedback and to sort of stir on the thoughts of the discussion of nostalgia elsewhere. And I noticed earlier in the chat that Mr. Vingel had said that, I'm going to butcher this because it's in German, and I know that Mr. Wegner's in here, so, guys can chew me out for it. But he says that nostalgia is the foundation of his worldview. I'm not going to try and pronounce it in German. Sorry, everybody. But, and I think that there's a lot of aspects of online political discourse where we sort of sell ourselves on the aspect of nostalgia or what the past was. Oftentimes there are the well-repeated phrase or the adage that in the past is a foreign country. And for a lot of Westerners, and even more so for Americans, that is never been more real than ever before. Also for really anybody in the West. But what I find to be is the interesting debate that we keep having. How much nostalgia is good? What is nostalgia to be paired with that can lead towards healthier growth? Or are we always constantly going to look backwards? Oh, good, Vingel. I pronounced it 3 or 4 times before I went live. Yeah, Weltanschauung. Okay, cool. Good to know. But So yeah, is there too much nostalgia going on in the world? Absolutely, by both ourselves in this sort of weird political space on the right, but also virtually everywhere. There is a desire, as AA likes to call it, this return to Fresh Prince, where you have people like James Lindsay or other anti-woke liberals that would love to go back to 1995, that would love to go back 27 to 28 years ago, back to the year I was born, and just think that everything was cool, everything was normal, and that life was perfectly fine. Or to even go back to a pre 9/11 world, it would be great. And I think that there is some truth to that. That there's a lot of people that would like to return to the comfort and security of the online or the pre 9/11, pre Facebook, pre digital age where things seemingly were okay. We can't go back to that. I think, needless to say, that that's obvious. Things are currently um, going to be different, and we can't return to that. But I think that it was very interesting when Dave had given his feedback and commentary, and I'm going to very much misremember it, but he had made a point that I think it comes from a generational worldview. Primarily that, for instance, I am probably about almost a decade younger than the distributist, not to throw shade or anything. I just know that I'm a younger man, and that he and I lived in two totally different worlds. I grew up as a literal definition of a rootless cosmopolitan. I was a military brat that got accustomed to every 3 years or so ago and just, pack up your bags. We're going to go somewhere else. I lived in Europe for a considerable length of time, in Germany for almost a decade. I have a very strong appreciation for European culture and history. That's something that I, as an American, get awe-inspired about, that you can go somewhere, and for instance, in Germany, like Cologne, right? You can go to the cathedral that had survived both world wars, that was built, during, what was it, the 1400s is when it finally finished. But right next to this grand Gothic Catholic cathedral, right next to it is a museum from Roman settlements in Germania and what the Roman life was like in this part of the country and what the Romans did and what they believed in and everything like that. And to me, that as an American is really awe-inspiring. But at the same time, I was someone that didn't get to experience the pre 9/11 world. I can remember that day like it was no tomorrow because my father was at the Pentagon when all that stuff happened. And we thought he was dead for most of the day. And that definitely plays a role in how you view the world. And so growing up in a way where I can distinctly remember, of course, the dial up, my grandmother always saying, if you want to get on the computer, you got to make sure no one's got a phone call or expecting one anytime soon, to where now, literally plugged in right next to me is this, my phone. And you're connected to it all the time, which is partially why I advocate for some kind of technological ascesis. But that tends to be the case. But now that's a whole other thing. Is that I can remember a pre-digital, pre-social media world. Really the 1990s end, I think, with 2000, and the 2000s end a little early with 2007, with the midst of the financial collapse and the creation of the smartphone and Facebook and what came afterwards. But postmodernism is a deep form of homelessness, says certain event. I would argue that there's probably some truth to that. I mean, if you spend so much time deconstructing or articulating that everything is some kind of thing that needs to be, inculpated as some kind of prison status or whatnot, yeah, I'm inclined to take that belief. But our nostalgia is somewhat deserved. You have to really be aware of the rift of 2007, the year the smartphone was created. And to some extent. And I think that that's what comes into it, is that we view ourselves in generations. Older millennials will bash on younger millennials or older Zoomers, in the same way that Zoomers and Gen Alpha are kind of in their own bag. And we look at Gen Z, politically speaking, and we're like, oh man, things are really, really bad, because every poll, every research into identities and orientation will indicate that Gen Z and other young people indicate that, oh, well, by 2030, there's going to be 25% of the, voting population that is, under the big flag of big homo. And it's thinking to myself, well, that's intense. That nowadays, what is the best way to enslave people is then to have a suicide contagion as service, where people are perpetually depressed, clinging on to this sexual liberation theology where this is the only way to attain salvation is to shed your heterosexuality and dismantle the patriarchy and whiteness and things like that. And that's your way of transcendence. But yeah, some, however, don't do that. I've noticed that on this side of the political spectrum, or in our little corner of things, this thing of ours, as Thomas77 likes to say, that there was a little more or less generational bashing. But I think we're all fundamentally cognizant of what the generational differences are incurring. For instance, Jay Burden had a conversation last year, I want to say about 4 or 5 months ago, with the discussion over what was Gen X like, because, here was a guy born, I want to say 1999. I don't know how old. I know he's a Zoomer, for sure, for certain. But just asking what Gen X was like, him and Ace, Kid Ace, was asking questions about Gen X. I thought that was really interesting. But to get back on the subject of nostalgia, because I'm definitely getting myself all over the place, and I wanted to be more organized, was that generationally, it does sort of inculcate everybody. I'm just as much surrounded by nostalgia as I think Gen Xers were. My parents are straight Gen Xers, born at the end of the 1960s, and they were sort of the older Gen X, I guess. But they were, around when Star Wars originally came out in the movie theaters. They watched almost every 80s movie that came out. But it's funny because, for instance, my father has nostalgia for things that, he watched as a kid, on television, whether it's One Adam 12 or the, black and white films of John Wayne, The Longest Day, and things like that. And in that regard, it definitely comes to my mind that we're all brought into it, because now millennials who grew up with the prequels, who either hated them or loved them, the older ones, like, those of Red Letter Media who are entering their late 30s, early 40s, are definitely not a fan in that regard. And in the same way, younger kids of the millennial generation, such as myself, I had a very fond love for the prequels, and I still love them to this day, even though I knew that they're garbage. Now, what does that all entail? That it's very easy to get more and more of a broad tent to people to take a look at intellectual properties and to recycle them, and for us to be like, hey, do you remember that one thing? Literally the South Park member berry thing, which is probably the best piece of social commentary that that they had. And I think that was all this alongside what I had written in that essay, which was inspired by The Caretaker. And only after did I write that essay did I realize Mark Fisher interviewed The Caretaker, the musician. And I was like, oh, well, okay, good to know. I didn't know. I haven't read anything that Mark Fisher has done, so that's a good thing to know. But the thing that comes to my mind about all this is that we're all on social media now. The post-2007 age is here. There are new forms of social media every day. I'm not on TikTok. I wasn't on Vine, although that was all the rage in high school. Gives away my age, right? And everyone was talking about how to create the perfect, 5 to 7 second clip for the ultimate humor or likes, or just to share a random hot take or an opinion or a reply to somebody. And that nowadays we are surrounded, I think, by okay, Gio, I guess we're going to review Mark Fisher next week. But, those kind of, to get myself back on track, we're sort of surrounded by all forms of nostalgia. Vaporwave aesthetics are a bit of the 1980s, in the same way that the I think I even put that up as a meme there on one of my Substacks about September 11th, was that little like Doge with the propeller hat on. And he's like, oh boy, I can't wait to grow up in a decade of economic optimism and, American prosperity. And then bam, it just ends. In the same way that MySpace dies to Facebook and Twitter and the new forms of social media that exist. And then there are, of course, some that don't make it. Does anyone use Yik Yak anymore? That's another fun question, right? Things that you have to ask yourself, because that used to be the anonymous message thing. And I remember someone had gotten in trouble. I think it was like in Colorado College, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, about using it in regards to claiming that some group of people were not all that attractive. Yeah, well, yeah, basically that. And so in the same way our meme culture is intrinsically nostalgic based because everyone can remember the reference because everyone grew up with a SpongeBob and they knew exactly what that was and they could relate to the culture that came within it and they can kind of understand what's in character or what isn't. And I think that because we're on social media, everything relates back to our childhood, intellectual properties that become the quote unquote pop culture. All of a sudden, we are brought into a rather schizophrenic environment. And that was a big reason as to why I wanted to write that essay, is because it becomes really easy to implant a false memory in one's brain about, oh, yeah, that's how things were. That's how things used to be, when in fact that they weren't. The left does this as well, in that regard, where the left will try to revise history and talk about economic prosperity in ways that fit their narrative or that it doesn't exist at all. So, for instance, I think that everyone can look at the memes or the things that they say about what's the word I'm looking for? The way that the left talks about the 1950s. No, people didn't own houses. No, people weren't successful in these suburbs with nuclear families, and they didn't have meaningful wages that they could live on one person incomes and raise a family of 3 or whatever. They have to deny its existence. I always had to laugh at that because the 1950s and the 1940s, 50s, and 60s are some of the most recorded times of that era, besides, of course, our present age, where everyone's got a cell phone, everyone has a selfie. This will be the time of a historian's life if we ever have historians in the future that can look back and be like, wow, this was a generation of narcissism. This was a generation that tried to scramble and find for meaning. But I think the other reason why I wanted to delve into the subject of nostalgia is because I think people nowadays more than ever, myself, being in his now entering his late 20s and looking back on my life and talking to other people my age or even older than me, that everyone's got a problem with meaning. And we search for nostalgia and we dig for it, trying to understand our roots and where we were. And that's definitely something that I've been taken a part of since I moved out to where I am. So, for instance, I've lived all over the country. I've lived both coasts. I've lived in the middle. I've lived overseas. I've got to experience quite a bit. And to be a man under 30 and to see all sorts of stuff puts me in an incredibly blessed location to see that I got to see a lot of things before 2009 or 2011 or the migrant crisis. I don't know how on earth I was going to be. I don't know how if I would ever go back to Europe, or at least the places I grew up in, because a lot of those military bases now are used to house refugees, which is even more depressing. But to get back more on subject, I think about my life, and I think that this might be a rather I don't know how common this is, but it reminded me of a talk that Charlemagne gave at the U.S. event last year in February, where the suburbs serve a purpose in America, but one of the things that they're really, really bad at is that they have a very high level of deracinating you. You're not connected to really any cultural center. You're a periphery to a city, and you're not really beholden to anything else but that city's politics. And in the same way that your suburban life is a lot different than rural or urban life. And I've kind of experienced all three. And now I get to live a much more rural life where I understand memes about people wanting to go to Walmart in the middle of the night or things like that. And at the same time, where nowadays the internet has destroyed, I think, a lot of what makes a culture unique or where they were at. And for one instance, right, I've talked about it before, but it's very strange where I live, where on the road where I drive, right, I can see kids, teenagers riding their horses to go to the park or to go to the high school or go to the stadium. And then all of a sudden, right, they're still using the same lingo that you would see on Twitter or TikTok or other social media. And to me, it's absolutely astounding that in a lot of ways, the internet has taken the map and just folded it up. And now everyone can just be pierced through with a pencil and everyone's affected. And it's certainly it uproots you from all things. And I hate to go back to the thesis statement of all my projects in 2022, but yeah, you are digitally deracinated. And in doing so, people are searching for meaning. And in regards to that, I think that Chad is being rather ornery today. It's quite funny. But on that point, I think that that illustrates why there are so many people constantly searching for meaning or purpose. Why are people constantly going through all four quadrants of the political spectrum that we normally use for political compass tests, alongside religion, philosophy, politics, what books they read, what content is cringe, what they don't read, what kind of new cult of personality are they going to get into? And when they do that, all of a sudden things just disappear into the ether of whatever their self used to be. And whatever form of individuality that they had is gone. And I think nostalgia plays a major role when it comes towards popular culture. So, like I mentioned earlier, all intellectual properties are destroyed, they are erased, they are brought down to be consumed by the new woke mind virus. Um, and on the digital archipelago with Geo, we had covered Soren Kierkegaard's essay and well-known writing of the present age. And there are things within Kierkegaard's writing that I think are very applicable to this year, the year of our Lord 2023, wherein we view things on the basis of generations, not individuals or not great men. We view things solely on, oh well, this Zoomers, right? Millennials, and then the press was notorious for millennials, especially because millennials are now getting older and older, into their mid to late 30s, early 40s, where they're past the idea that they're killing all these industries either because they can't afford it or because the cultural trends via social media and what they've been ingratiated in public education, both in high school and college, that's gone, right? In the same way that a lot of people are sort of realizing that the only way that they might be able to afford a home is we're all banking on this like next housing market crash, which by all in turns means another recession. And that's another thing too, is that there's also the destruction of childhood innocence, I think, where we have a time or a generation that has grown up to see 9/11, the financial collapse in 2008, everything that came afterwards, and now probably another financial crisis. And so for them, it's just like, well, that's pretty rough. Although we've never had more material comforts, now more than ever. And I think that that's another reason why the phrase too much nostalgia is kind of a very valid criticism in regards to not only what I wrote, but also the alluring and tantalizing political pornography that comes with saying that the past is a foreign country. Some of people, of course, not to misjudge their intentions, because I can understand looking at some of those things where, oh yeah, like obviously I want to have a society that was like that. I come from a tradition. And that's the first part that I'm going to talk about. And then we'll get to the part where it's negative. Is that on one hand, you can recognize the importance of where you came from and what you've done and what you have accomplished as a people, as a nation, and more importantly, I think as a family. I think that there's a lot of humor that I hear from my European friends, especially when I grew up overseas, was that, oh, like a lot of Americans want to come back to Europe and they want to understand where they came from, what their family crest is, and things like that. And I've looked up mine, and in the same way, I've also looked up my, service records of family who had served in the Civil War, the Mexican-American War, and things like that. And I'm very blessed that that stuff exists, that someone in my side of the family had taken the time to record genealogical records, and I can find out how far back it goes, how well the records go back to. And it can go back as far that they can trace it is a little past the 800s, so a little after the time of Charlemagne, which is pretty impressive. But it does illustrate, I think, that some people have a tie to it. Now, I certainly know that everyone's got mixed feelings about certain characters in all these ways, but I do share a very similar feeling that Paul Fahrenheit shares, because he's from Virginia, and Virginia is one of the states in the country here in America that has some of the richest history, not just with regards to the Civil War, but its politicians, the founding of the country. It is a part of a great people, and it used to be something that was very regional, and it's not really in existence anymore. So, for instance, in 2020, they stopped doing Lee Jackson Day, which is set at the same time as the MLK holiday, and also at the same time where you can walk on certain battlegrounds or certain parts of, middle of nowhere Civil War historical poster marks, and you can feel a deep sense of connection because your family was there, your family fought there, you have roots here. You're not connected to them in any way, shape, or form, but they're there. I think this is also me being a little personal in that regard because um, if you didn't grow up there the whole time, if you weren't ingratiating yourself in this history, it kind of can feel very saccharine. It can feel very fake, like you're LARPing, like it's not you, right? Like you're not these men, like you're not connected to any of these people. Can you look at yourself in the mirror and be happy? And in some ways, I think that's sort of segues nicely into the negative aspects of nostalgia because, well, on one hand, nostalgia can be very poisoning towards you because it can be as I think it was Arthur Powell who wrote it, the Atop the Cliffs bit. He had said that, well, it can be very much misery porn or despair porn, which for all reasons, the overuse of the word pornography, I think, is perfectly fine in a political context because there are things that we do fetishize. I mean, I know that Walter Benjamin is a frothing communist, but he had kind of made a point in critiquing Ernst Junger that all they can talk about was what came before and what has been lost and nothing more than that, about a vision created towards the future. Now, you don't see those people, Matthew. You're absolutely right. The media is not going to cover that. And I mean, I used to live in El Paso where I could see all that shit happening firsthand and have people take advantage of a political system where they would talk about DACA and Dreamers and stuff like that. It's very frustrating in a lot of ways. Sorry for that. But to get back to Arthur's critique, and I have quite a few more notes here. I mean, in Ireland, that's happening every week. Well, no, good. I'm glad to hear that. If you don't see that, then I hope that there are people, if they're saying kick him out now, I mean, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. So this is war. Wow. Yeah. So this goes to the negative aspects of it, and I'll relay this back to Kierkegaard once more, is that, well, everyone's viewed in generations, but everything is leveled, the great leveling, as he likes to write about. And that leveling is the deprivation of all individuality, the individual families and men in history that had created great things, that had accomplished what they had done to get them to where they are, regardless of their status or station. It's in the same way, right, where I also have to think about Ancestry.com, because America has changed the way that it is. You have to tell the Ellis Island story all over again. They don't ever do it for regular old white people, but says a lot about how things are currently going. But even nostalgia is marketed to non-politically right-leaning, or whatever the space you would want to call it. That mass of people, that's not who they're marketing to. But nostalgia is everywhere. And in doing so, I think that we can find ourselves caught in a aesthetic form of, the paralysis of analysis, where, as someone in the chat mentioned, you have to surpass the theory cell state of mind. You have to surpass the aesthetics that you had saw before and recognize that some of that stuff is gone. And for better or for worse, it's gone. And I think that we all kind of want to long and go back to where things used to be and enjoy that, but we can't reel ourselves to something that we can't very physically go back to. We can't travel across the fourth dimension, being time. So we're stuck here, right? And there's the ever-going present that we're going to have to deal with. Now, within that regard, I think that it becomes very easy for us to fall into a trap where we're constantly reiterating the same things over and over again. And there was some critique I had saw to Mr. Luthemplar's Restoration Bureau on Substack or on Telegram. And I quite like that stuff because it sort of provides this vision of, well, what would the world look like if we won? And, we have to report all these cringe and pause big homo stuff out of here and talk about, well, we should return to some kind of tradition within this new age. Is that realistic? No, but it's certainly a nice palliative image to look at and be like, this makes the right-wing dopamine receptor, monkey press button, and we'll see, right? And so I think that is a big issue that we certainly find ourselves to look at, where we are in an ever, an accelerating present where everything is happening all at once and at all times. And because of social media, we can nostalgically be omniscient, our attempt to be omnipotent about both the past, present, and trying to predict the future with hot takes and threads and quote tweets on Twitter. And in all regards to this, I find it to be very bizarre because we're literally driving ourselves mad because there's now some journals and some data that indicates that increased social media usage can lead to early onset dementia or schizophrenia, which there are literal schizophrenics that probably wander our timelines or our live stream chats and things like that. I can think of one or two of them, not to name names, but there are people that have been driven mad or had some predisposition to a mental illness, in which this kind of technology, this aspect of media and history and images brings us all aboard to do so. But at the same time, to maybe understand where some of it is good, is that we are also wanting to look towards what ancients had said and what history has said and what men on our side had said of things in order to be more critical. And in action, yeah, Matthew Berry does drive men mad. Because what is the ultimate containment form? Is been political discourse online or writing and content creation. Sometimes you have to be realistic and know that I am a guy that offers commentary. I'm part of a commentariat class of people. That doesn't stop me from doing things locally and participating in my church life and making sure that people are taken care of or that people have access to good stuff. But, I'm not a part of the Christopher Rufo's crowd leading the charge on legislation. Like, I'm aware of my position, and it is one step above journalist. It's I know where I'm at. I'm low right here. I know my place. But that doesn't stop me from participating locally. I go to my county GOP meeting. I print out my friends' Substacks as a way of political pamphleteering. That stuff is remarkably effective because now I've got boomers who know who Morgoth and Orrin McIntyre are because I printed out their Substacks before talking about issues. But that becomes the question of, well, in this day and age, we look back towards the past. And I think that that's also essential, especially because it's a lot of that stuff. I think it was Millennial Woes in his outro AMA on this last millennial, just last month, where he had said that tradition is the solution to perennial problems. And I've noticed that a lot with religion as well, is that my faith is the answer to eternal problems. And with that, I found it very funny, and I've told the story a few times, but I always find it interesting that in this, just not too long ago, I was listening to my priest cite, C.S. Lewis, and then he was referencing various fathers that had influenced C.S. Lewis, and it just reminded me of, in the back of my brain, in this moment of hubris, and it was total hubris. I was being bad, very bad, where I thought, oh, wow, this sounds exactly like an Orrin McIntyre video. This sounds like something I would hear him do with his little rock music intro and then talk about the abolition of man or something like that. And then I realized to myself, well, you idiot, we're all looking back towards the past because these are where the answers lie, both for self-discipline, marriage, family life, whatever it may be, we're all there. And it's just like, whew, nothing new under the sun in this regard. Synthesis is very, very rare. Novelty in a sense in which it is good for us is, I find, increasingly hard to find, because what cultural innovation have we created in the last 60 years that has been good? We have masked the rotting stench of cultural, political, demographic decay with technological advances and saying that that's good. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good the technology is. It doesn't matter how fast my, $2,500, dare I say the word rig without being cringe, but that my desktop computer boots up. That doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, people are still longing for something meaningful. Excuse me. But to get back on topic here, it seems that we are being leveled and are both being nostalgic for things that had already came by, where things weren't so fake and gay, right? But that's what I think that the leveling is nowadays, is that all individuality, we're all pursuing to be individuals, right? With this new sort of political, these new political forms of liberation. Oh, I'm XYZ, or, oh, I'm going to do a video of me talking about my husband and my boyfriend that all live together in the same house. And we're all going to identify as these rather strange neurodivergent list of oppression Olympics. I know that sounds very 2015-ish, but intersectionality has still not been defeated. Like, there hasn't been a new thing on the left that has, taken down Kimberly Crenshaw or bell hooks. And so you have to look at what works. And as Radlib said, I like to look at proof of existence or proof of life. Those things work really well. And so I've noticed that there's been a few things. His talk at the Witten event in the UK was very good in regards to how Christianity can manage to deal with our current mess right now, or what the dissident right can do right now. And then there are others that have pointed towards, how did Japan manage in the wake of colonial interests or European interests coming, whether it was isolationism, which I don't think you can have happen, but also the Meiji Restoration. But the heat has definitely been turned up, and you have people scrambling to talk about why is the heat being turned on, and we're constantly not. We're just jumping, and we're talking about how hot it is in the pot, we frogs, but and we're not talking about, well, maybe we should get out of the pot or do something about who's turning up the heat. But in regards to nostalgia, it's good to have, but I think within moderation, as in all things. But the thing is how do we escape it? How do we escape the bell hook? Well, not a bad idea, Richard. Not a bad idea. And some of us I think, struggle with it in a way that we have to look towards something new. We say it all the time, where you get even the most awful, disgusting people like Anthony Fantano saying that the right can't create art or whatever. But there does need to be a restored discussion on creativity, on our art and media and so on like this. Not in the 2016 or even the EFAP style of media criticism. I think that has its space conquered. But I mean, how do we look towards past tradition? Art Deco, Gothic architecture and design, and how do we integrate that into our present age? I do think that unless you are incredibly well-disciplined, I don't think being over online 24/7 and things like that works. I myself, for Lent, am not going to be on Twitter for 40 days. I will have some automated system that, posts my videos and Substacks and things like that. And so I think that stuff is rather important. I think that archaeofuturism is a neat aesthetic idea. I'm not an artist. I'm not a philosopher or anything like that. These are my thoughts. And I wanted to share them all with you to get your opinions, the comment section, because I get a lot of your feedback and I take it all to heart, because some of it's really good, to give you all a nice pat on the back. But I think that you have to temper nostalgia in a way that... you do it in ways in which you can create something for the present age or talk about the present time. Because if you don't talk about the future, and if you don't talk about what animates you, that becomes the problem. Nostalgia can be an animating force. As I said earlier in the beginning, it can be done in a way that motivates you toward acting upon the tradition of your forebears and forefathers. That's perfectly fine. But when you go, wham, look at what we've lost. Oh, the past is a foreign country. Like, oh, the West, the Chud Jack, the West has fallen type deal. That's when the problem happens. And that's where the issue comes in. And to maybe steelman the essay a bit is that I think that what we are trying to do in this effort to remember is that we ourselves aren't looking towards what's in front of us, because we can't remember the past effectively, because we're overly stimulated, and most importantly, we're over what's the word I'm looking for? We're overstimulated, and to take a line from Ted Kaczynski, we're definitely over socialized. I find it absolutely bizarre, and this is not to be a flex or anything like that. I find it to be bizarre that there are more people on this earth that know me as this guy, the frog, and not my IRL self. There are over 12,000 people that follow that Twitter account that has me. And I find that to be bizarre. That's well beyond Dunbar's number. That's well beyond the social media form of Dunbar's number. And yet, at the same time, there we are. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to wield it with considerable influence to do something more positive and more good. But you shouldn't be an account with that many followers saying, "Well, this is how bad things are. This is where things used to be." And then the point of that essay, I think, was really to say, well, we must remember the West for what it was, but to look forward, because if not, we're going to be ourselves turning into schizophrenics and dementia patients. And sometimes I feel like we want history, we wanted history to end at a certain point. It's like, oh, well, if history ended right before 1964, if history ended right before, 85 or 1860, period, or 1850, things would be great. And I kind of do agree with sort of the John Michael Greer take that we can't force a retro aspect of the world. The reality of geopolitics is very true. The world just doesn't pause. We constantly will seek out new military and technological new technologies for military conquest. That's just innately pointed where we're at. History is what's happening while you're posting. Well, that's true. History happens even while you shitpost on Twitter. And who knows, maybe someone's shitpost will be recorded in is the ultimate way to do it. But we have witnessed through nostalgia bait, both with me, even everything from Scooby-Doo to Star Wars to even classical musicals, from like the 1920s, 30s, and 40s have all been revamped for their own disgusting conglomerations for whatever today's current thing of politics is. And in that regard, it does put things to be really, really bad. Because it's like, wow, they're going to twist all these things. And that should be motivating to you because it illustrates to you that these people cannot create. A force of entropy cannot create anything good. It cannot do anything but destroy. It cannot do anything but wear you down because they are only here as a destructive force. And I think that is the thing that definitely comes to my mind in this. In the same way that even in this current political scene, I think a lot of people would really, really like the energy to go back to 2016. I think that was a once in a lifetime moment. I don't think we're going to go back to that in regards to politics anytime soon. I would love to be wrong. I would love to experience 2016 again. That's some of the happiest political memories of my life as a younger man, but I know that it's not going to happen. And I think that those are things that we have to be mindful of. But when is it good? Well, it is good because it is. It should tell us what went well, what was successful, what was popular, what survived, and how can we bring it to the present age. But the problems and the difficulties of overcoming it is that IP grave robbing, the temptation of product. You remember that product, don't you? You remember how good things were. You remember that character. You remember how you felt as a child. You remember Kevin McAllister in Home Alone. Well, here he is now doing stand-up comedy and doing things like that and appearing on Red Letter Media. Oh, we'll go watch another half of that. I'm just as guilty. I consume Red Letter Media because the boomerist aspects of Mike's DeClausa, it speaks to my soul. But the other thing about it, though, is that it's easy to monetize. And it's not just big intellectual properties. One of the things that I turned on incognito mode on my, I was meant to click my channel, but if you're on your phone on the YouTube app, it'll be like, oh, bam, incognito mode. So whatever you watch on YouTube doesn't appear up on your main channel's feed, but you have to deal with advertisements and things like that. And one of the things that I had noticed was that there's apparently a very popular. And again, this is not on my channel. This is just how the algorithm went. But it was reviewing and talking about like Lego sets from 2003 or 2004 or 2005, going through every year and every theme because Lego's been around for 40, 50 years now. And it was just like, whoa, and these people have sizable channels of like 30,000 to 400,000 reviewing sets and talking about what things used to be and what the evolution of Lego is and how expensive things are. Like weird perpetual infantilization. And that's the other aspect that I find interested is that because we are consistently expanding our adolescence, where I know plenty of people that went to graduate school after my undergrad, they were like, yeah, I'm going to go get a master's degree. I want to go get my MA in this because I don't want to deal with the real world just yet. I want more time. I want more time in college. I want more time to do this. I don't want to go deal with the real world yet. I want to be in school. And I was like, okay, that says a lot. Like, you aren't thinking about your career. Your main motivating impetus was because you were afraid of adulthood. You were afraid of maturation. And in some instances, even myself, I can be very much impulsive and quick-tempered. I think social media does a big part of that, but transgressiveness is fun to play with. You never know after saying the letter N what comes next. But it's, I think that it leads us to be perpetually stuff like that. Like, at the same time, and I think that Arthur Powell, since you're in the chat, I think you have a very good point here. People confuse nostalgia for legitimate griefs about how things/products get worse. I mean, that's very true. I think about that with cars. I think about that with appliances. There's legitimate memes about how certain fridges or appliances from like 1970 or 1980 last a lifetime, whereas nowadays we're in an overly marketized Internet of Bodies type deal. I mean, even the recent drama with the Wizards of the Coast, right, and their new open license agreement that would totally destroy the D&D community as we know it. There's a video by Tim's Variety that kind of explains it really well, and it says a lot about how bad things are going. But I think that it can also be incredibly paralyzing, because we want to go back, and because that this day and age requires some kind of no individuality, but a rather adolescent or infantilized adult longing to go back to the joys of childhood. I think that says a lot of it. And I had this conversation in a chat. I think it was Mary Harrington who had said it, and she had said that a lot of aspects of memory and how we view things culturally there certainly plays a role when it comes to this stuff with teachers and grooming. And I had replied and I said, I really think it has a lot more to do with the death of innocence, or the taking of childhood innocence, especially because we in this time want to use and go back to what we used to be as kids. I saw it not too long ago, and apparently this word, according to Google Ngram, has been around for a while, but the word kidult, KIDULT, ULT, kid/adult, kidult, which I've never heard before. I've always heard the word man-child, which is just far more applicable, although it definitely goes in one direction, because let's face it, women can act like man-children as well about things that naturally are. Let's not kid ourselves. But so many people get interested in the stuff that teenagers used to do. And, one of the things that I liked doing when I was before my transplant, before my whole life had changed, was that, I liked the Society for Creative Anachronism, because what did that bring back? Well, it brought back men in full suits of armor beating the tar out of each other with close to realistic weapons as humanly possible, where you would get bruised and beat the shit out of you. And it was fantastic because it was a martial art. But here we are. I would love to go back to that. I wish I could do more of that. But I guess I will wrap up these thoughts here. I know it was not nearly as organized as I want them to be, but chat as always is wonderful and as interactive as before that. But I will say this, is that nostalgia has a fantastic capability to motivate people and to remind them what has been lost. And that so basically, soy boys want to go back to the good times, fascists want to go back to the bad times, and reactionaries want to go back to church. I guess. I mean, I already go to church, but I also recognize that the church of today is not the church of 750 AD, at least not culturally speaking. Priests nowadays are talking about the attention economy and the fact that our prayer life and our aesthetical life is ruined by social media and by our online stuff. I don't take my phone with me to church at all, or if it's in my pocket, it's turned off. But, here we are. You can find motivation and energy from childhood nostalgia as well. You can quench your thirst, but in it is just as easily drowned. And yeah, that's the big issue that I've found in these last several weeks, because I didn't know what I was going to talk about today, and I was doing my usual walk around where I live, and this conversation came back into my head, and I just started walking in a very long circle. I was doing laps around the land, and I was just thinking to myself, just arguing out loud what some of my thoughts were. And I said, okay, this is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Because yeah, it becomes really easy for us to lose ourselves in what we used to be. We're not, it's the famous meme about like, you're not some 1200s era crusader. You're a guy that lives in like Norman, Oklahoma, or like Kansas or whatever. And I think that certainly comes to my mind is that that's what we're dealing with, is that we want to be rooted to something. And I think this affects Americans a lot more, especially younger ones. I know that our friends across the pond or those in the East may have a different perspective because there is something that's more rooted to them. But consider that within 60 years, any connection to a life before the Second World War is non-existent. It's not. And that was the big reason why I wanted to write that essay, was that if you don't have a well-written or a well-done oral or family tradition of what came before you, or that you can point to, it becomes really easy for you to go to any other kind of well and potentially fall into it. And a lot of us yearn for the olden days, or to look at the colorized photos of what came to be. And it should motivate you, and it should tell you that this is what's been taken from you, and this is why you should act the way that you do. But I know that comes with the temptation to just get lost in it. It would be very strange if all of a sudden everyone in my like political sphere started dressing like late 1890s aristocrats. Although I'm not going to lie, their suits and their appearance, it's got drip. Let's not kid ourselves. But nostalgia, I think full compro gets it to the heart of it, what I'm trying to say. Nostalgia should be used as a tool and at times as a weapon, but with any weapon or with any tool, you can definitely injure yourself. It's like a buzzsaw. You have the potential to cut off your hand and things like that. And yeah, Richard, you're right. And that is the sort of final point. In an era of an identity crisis where people are driven schizophrenic or with some form of disassociation. I mean, we are literally deterritorialized every day. This is the root of the nature of American politics. This is the nature of American foreign policy when it comes to soft power. I have a great video to shill my own stuff about deterritorialization and American soft power on this issue. Is that at the end of the day, they are going to use these new politics, these things that uproot you from your beliefs and your ideas, and they're going to instill new stuff, which is why, for instance, all the conversation about Afghanistan after like 2010 started focusing more and more on like women's education, gay rights, girls in schools, violence against women, and it stopped being about like terrorism. It painted them in a new way to fit the progressive format. And, it leads us into a form of neuroticism where it's like, well, what did we used to be before all this? What was it? This used to be like the rainbow that used to signify God's promise to never flood the earth again. And now they're calling it the progress flag, where everyone and their mother can lop off a part of themselves and say that they're unique and individual. You're all uniquely mutilated just the way you are. And that tends to be the case. And in a way that, we are, at least in terms of identity, there is a lot of neutering going on alongside the very real thing that we're watching in our politics here in America. But yeah, it tends to be the problem. I think that we're definitely going. Not dressing like a slob would actually motivate you. Well, why do you think I do this? Because I got rightfully, chewed out in a t-shirt in one episode of the Digital Archipelago. But yeah, ruined the rainbow. It sure did. We could, but he'll have to strike us in other ways, I think, when that time comes. But yeah, so that is going to be about 50 so minutes or so. I'm going to wrap up my thoughts there. And I will take questions from super chats. The entropy link is the pinned comment if you don't want to give Susan any money. However, that will not stop me if someone points out a very interesting thing in the chat, because as much as your support is appreciated in all formats, Substack, Subscribestar here, Entropy, I still want to interact with everyone else. Good luck with it. I no longer wear shirts and ties. I have more shirts and ties than I'd like to admit. And that tends to be the case. But I'm going to start with, I'm going to scroll back up and we'll just get started with the super chats that are listed here that I can bring up on screen. One of these days, maybe when I have a different internet connection, we'll try and do the whole OBS setup. That way I can have everything playing out. But yeah. So Leonard de Jaeger says for €5. Well, thank you so much. It is poison. Poison, I say. Yes, remember the past, but live in the real world, be with friends, dwell in at home, and be with God. I'm not going to oppose any of that. I say this as someone who does have a social life, who does go out and has a rather active church life, so I'm not too worried about that. I'll be going to Vespers later this afternoon, but those things all are important. That the past must be remembered, but I don't think that we can LARP it, and we cannot force it back in its existence. You cannot force a retro or a regressive version of what the state used to be. Lest that happens through some kind of devolution, which we might get with Spiteful Mutants, but who knows? But yes, we must, and that's been my hope. That was my project of 2022. The things that I want to work on in 2023, now that we've talked about what deracinates us, is how do we find self-discipline to handle it? And most importantly, how can we address ways for a more positive vision, which is why I agreed with Remnant that we have to talk about movies, art, architecture, culture, and more. Let's see here. Oh, he sends another one. I read one of the best, and this is by the same gentleman for €5. Thank you. He says, one of the best books I ever read was The Timeless Way by Christopher Alexander. The Timeless Way. The Timeless Way of Building, Christopher Alexander. Is a 1979 book by Christopher Alexander that proposes a new theory of architecture that relies on understanding and configuration of pattern designs. Well, okay. I guess the question would be, how much is it? Oh, well, it's a little, getting it used is a little pricey, but no worries. You'll love it and it will inspire to live a rude life. Well, good to know. I will have to take a look at it. Maybe I can find a PDF or something and glance over it, or use the Internet Archive. Machiavelli sucks to go for $4.99 US says, I can't think of one redeeming quality of the left. They have a very interesting sense of empathy and paternalism that the right shares, but for much different reasons. But they do have a sense of empathy or a sense of awareness of things. They have a Dickensian style of telescopic empathy, which is not good. But I think that we can't fully discount them or say anything that can be redeemed, because I think that you can redeem some lefties. Otherwise, you don't get former lefties that end up on this side, or you don't get people that don't come back to any kind of faith and just remain, shit-lib early 2000s new atheists. So I think that we have to find some redeeming feature to them, or at least as individuals, we have to find them. Maybe as the left itself, as some sort of large conglomerate of intersectional, destructive, entropic forces. Yeah, I can't find anything redeeming about that. I can, however, recognize that individual leftists or individual left people, atheists and so on, they probably can be redeemed, because I know that there are a lot of people that used to be shit libs that kind of woke up and smelled the coffee beans and realized that things were wrong. I occasionally dabble in poetry, Arthur. I just saw your chat because I'm scrolling through. Occasionally. I'm not very good at it. I used to be much better. I used to know how to structure styles and sonnets and quartets and things like that. I used to know a lot more. I'd like to do more of it. I just have to work at it, which means putting my work out there. Luthemplar for $10. Sometimes it feels like we don't want history to end, but we're the ones stuck in 2016, 1945, or 1971, rather than making a new chapter of history with entirely new political cleavages. Well, no. It's funny because every right-winger and their mother has probably criticized Francis Fukuyama at some point, talking about the end of history, which is a very Marxist concept, but Fukuyama makes it rather liberal in his argument. But we are perpetually stuck in a lot of ways. But I mean, there are some things that are timeless, that are not meant to adapt to the times, right? I don't think that if the times were to change as the way that they are now, doesn't mean I should throw out Deuteronomy 23:1, right? Whoever crushes their privy, with on purpose or cuts it off, shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. It's a very fitting verse for today's day and age. But I think that does require synthesis. for all the flack and all of the criticism that you can levy against, for instance, Curtis Yarvin, and then a lot of it's valid, and I have a lot of criticisms of the man myself. You can say the neo part of whatever neo-reactionary means nowadays. I don't think anyone calls themselves that. I certainly don't. I don't really give myself a label for anything. If anything, I would borrow Dave's term on his Twitter bio, reactionary gadfly, but that looked like a political cleavage. That looked like something where it was a understanding of today's techniques and today's politics with looking at maybe sort of Machiavellian monarchism, right? Not good, not great, but seems like a cleavage from the traditional old style grand old party versus the Democrats every time again. That's why I think people still talk about him. Plus, he's still alive in the same way that Nick Land is still alive, right? Although his form of right accelerationism, I don't think is the way to go either. But I think that we are looking. I think that is something that people want to consider is new political formats or formulations. And who was it? Uber Boyo that had a video about like right wing progressivism. I have not watched it, but I mean, at least he's thinking of something, and he's trying to generate an idea or a concept or a political formula, and I can't fault him for that. I think that we should be focusing on how best to make a new political vision and formula for the times, but that also requires an aesthetic above all else, which is why I like the work that you do, and I like the archaeo-futurist style, or even the Mallard for his traditional Tory style that they are, high Tory style that they are. They talk about sort of an Anglo-futurism, which looks really good. Is that kind of like, oh, look at how cool things could be? Yeah, a little bit. But at the same time, I think you need to have something that animates you towards cleaving off from the old or cleaving off from what is destructive. If you are the tree, right, that is good, we want to find a way to cleave ourselves off of an invasive root or a dying branch, because that's currently the path that we're on is definitely entropic and dying. Scroll through here. Monothalmos, there is no greater sorrow than to recall happiness in times of misery. Dante Alighieri, The Divine Comedy. Yeah, although it's Beatrice that guides him out, but yeah, I think that's true. Is that when things are bad, it's like, well, you remember the good times. It reminds me of there's that web comic. It's like the post-apocalypse, like the bombs have dropped or whatever. There's these two guys in hazmat suits, and a guy goes, "Man, I miss the internet," and then he like draws something, and it's turned into a meme now, where like someone's drawn like the Corona Chan thing, or someone's drawn or a classic like a troll face or something. It's like, thanks for that, man. Like we're not getting it back, it's gone, but it's nice to miss things. But yeah, I mean, that is indeed a greater sorrow, just as what could have been, right? Those are the two things that I think are the ultimate mind killers, is where we think about what could have been, or, oh, what have we lost? The West has fallen. Billions must die. Like, we can't be that. We really can't. But let's see here. Prince of Parma. I have to now look up what this is. South African Rand. I did not know that you were South African, Prince of Parma. Oh, well, thank you. Despite only 75 cents, South African 50 le. Well, I did not know that you were South African, Prince of Parma. I did no idea. So yeah, I mean, I greatly appreciate it nonetheless. Thank you so much. I was really much enjoying. I enjoy your artwork that you've done of this channel for things like that. Your covers for Twilight Imperium. You did all the cards for the factions for all the guys in our spaces, which I quite enjoyed. But yeah, I didn't know that you were South African. But no, thank you so much. Even if it is 85 cents, it goes a long way. Tuesday, I'm going to have to be very careful with how I word this. Isn't it funny how every solution to this problem is allegedly just going to be more global governance, technocratic control, and taking away, things that have been perpetually good for humanity, like beef, dairy, eggs, and never the things that are the real problem, geopolitically speaking, like India or China, or the desecration and the ecological destruction that we use of our current technological society, which is whether it's e-waste that we all send to Africa to be strip mined by children that will get cancer, and not instead it's more rich people in jets flying off to things. Um, the current consensus narrative that is brought out by the state and brought out by the media is not one that I believe in. Are things certainly happening? Yes, as things have always happened throughout cycles of history, geologically, ecologically, environmentally. But I have to be very careful on how I take this, because this is one of those hot button issues that Susan gets on. But I'm not a believer of the wholehearted narrative. I think that you need to focus on conservation and better care of the earth. As human beings, we are commissioned by God in our creation to be stewards of the earth. We are not doing the world's best job, whether it's in trash, waste, but we're also poisoning ourselves through our own destruction of the environment, which is just as bad. But yeah, not something that I agree with the science has settled on, because all that the science seems to settle on are models and crises that can't be replicated, that in turn are used to sell more globalist BS. So maybe I can talk about that in an Odyssey or a Substack or something. But yeah, there are certain things about it, though, that is very much real that we do have to address, whether it's just we're responsible as human beings for some of it. I'm not going to ever discount that. I'm sure that there is a lot of aspects of our industrial life that we've created that are problems, but there are certainly plenty of other problems that aren't going to be addressed, like volcanoes or cracks in the earth where methane gas will leak up, and then that causes emissions and things like that. But yeah, another thing that I can't get too into on YouTube. But yeah. Oh, I'm not South African, he says, but when in Rome, etc. Oh, so you're just in South Africa. Okay. Well, I have no idea where you're from. I didn't mean to like put you on the spot, Prince of Parma, but when in Rome, here's 85 cents. Yeah, it's definitely true. So we can certainly keep that in mind. Yeah, Peter, it would be nice if the big one would come for California, though, wouldn't it, Peter? As the old Robin Williams joke goes, then Nevada can be wine country. But it won't be in that regard. But more seriously, could we get Robert Dwegan for an episode? Well, I would love to. He came on. What's the word I'm looking for? He came on with Conscious Caracol and Mr. Patriarch like a year and a half ago to talk about some of the rioting that was happening in South Africa at the time and what that looks like, and the ethnic divisions between like Indians, coloreds, whites, Boers, the Anglos, and where they side with. I mean, that was quite good. And that just tends to be the case. And so, yeah, YouTube forces you to use the currency of your IP. Well, okay, well, that's good to know. But yeah, like I said, I would like to have him on. I didn't know when I had him on the first time how much he talks. He's quite a well-versed and intelligent man, so I'm just going to have to act accordingly the next time I have him on. But maybe Gio and I can have him on for the Digital Archipelago, where I can find things that I enjoy. And, I'm quite a fan of that, yeah. So, yeah, I agree. We do have to reclaim environmentalism. That I will wholeheartedly agree with. But, to go back to Prince of Parma, I would like to have him on. I would need to schedule a time. I would also like to do kind of also what Niccolo Soldo does, who has probably the best name of all Substacks, Fisted by Foucault. You can't beat that. I'm sorry. And I don't think anyone can. But, he has these written interviews. I don't know if they're recorded and then he just transcribes them, but I would certainly like to do that. Maybe in the future. There are a few people I would like to ask. I was unfortunately said no by I was told no by the wonderful Paul Kingsnorth, because he's busy on his writing projects, but I'm going to bug him again in like 6 or 7 months because I really want to interview him, because he's definitely my white whale. But yeah, there's plenty of things. And again, you're asking a question, since everyone's still talking about the environment. It's outside my wheelhouse of expertise. I would have to get people who know it. But yeah. All right. So there were a few entropy ones. Let's see. Bureaucrat Anon for $3 US says, would you ever look at a UK foreign policy for the Sunday stream / prudent observations? Could help with it, related to my job. UK interesting because a lot of it is bureaucratic fluff / failed projects and close to US concerns. Well, I would love to. I'd greatly appreciate it in that regard. If you have some background or insight, my DMs on Twitter are open, and you can always go to the About section of my channel description, and you can find my channel email there. I'm very quick to respond, usually within the day or the next day. So yeah, I would love to know more about it. There's a little bit of history I know from the Cold War about like the Labor government's position of foreign policy with regards to the UK and the USSR. The very funny story about how the MiG-15 was developed. But yeah, I think that would be fun. Although I would definitely want to have more UK people on, because again, I'm not British. I'm not from the UK. I'm not too in-depthly familiar with it. So yeah, I think that that's something there for it to happen in the future. But let's see here. Oh, there was another one from Ben White for $5 US. Ben White, the infamous romance update of the Distributists live streams. He says for $5 US, hey, Prude, I asked a question on your New Year's stream about the story we were taught in high school about American culture, like rock music playing a big part on the fall of the Soviet Union. Is this story true? Or are you able to get to this question? I don't know if it was answered in the New Year's stream itself, Ben. And if I missed your question, I'm going to have to go back and check if I messed up. I don't know too much about that being the narrative. I know that there was a lot of internal reasons as to why the Soviet Union did it. I think that I'm more likely to question any contemporary historiography of how the USSR fell. And I would have to do some research into the American soft power question on its influence of it. But my gut reaction is to be instinctively no, but at the same time, I can't discount things like Sosmodot or the impact of, wanting to smuggle in American culture and movies and recorded vinyls that were smuggled into parts of Soviet republics. So, I mean, there's probably some truth to it, but at the same time, I know that a lot of those things were probably relaxed as well. But that's not the area of history that I studied. I can tell you all about like the early colonial period of the United States. I can tell you a lot about our founding fathers, how the Constitution went down with the Philadelphia Convention, the Articles of Confederation. So, but that would be a question, Ben, that I would have to do some more in-depth research on for sure. But there you go. Be that guy. Samzid, yeah, there you go. Not to be that guy, but I am that guy. Well, Vingel, let that be the case. It's good though when I have people calling me out. It improves my pronunciation and my English, so thank you, as well as my understanding of how to pronounce stuff. But I think that seems to be it, both on the entropy and the other sections, which I'm very grateful as always. But this was the thing that I was walking around the land and I was just thinking to myself, well, how do we balance it out? Because I think that when we get nostalgic, we can sometimes also fall into a false sense of what the past was actually like. The left does it with its historical revisionism, but at the same time, like I said in that essay, we oftentimes can fall in towards the advertisements that were cooked up by madmen and, not people that we would want to agree with, like out down in Madison Avenue that were made and created. And I think that that's also a concern is that we don't want to fall into the false consciousness or false memories of what the past used to be like. And those are things that you have to relate to. And where nostalgia gets really powerful, I think was a while ago, there was a video shared by a woman saying that this is a recording of a woman who was like 100-something years old in like the 1920s. She was, or the 1930s, and she was born in like 1830 something, and talking about, the entire 19th century from this like young woman's, now old, but as a younger woman's perspective. I was like, well, that's incredibly powerful. And we don't really have a lot of that. And what we do have, right, was the World War II veteran crying, knowing that, he's 100 years old and he'd lost what he grew up with and what the country was and what he was raised with. And those things should animate us to do better and to have the kind of politics that really are going to go out of our ways to change our worldview and to change the things that get us in a better position for our life. But I will have, to sort of wrap things up here, I will have a video out this coming week on the 18th is going to be the next video. And I will also have a real talk recorded. I already have the footage recorded. I couldn't believe I caught something in January, but I got two on camera, so I was very happy with that. And I will record that conversation probably tonight or tomorrow, and release it for our wonderful patrons on Subscribestar so they can see it early. And that way they have access to seeing all the goodies early. And with that, and then we'll be on Geo's channel for the Digital Archipelago this week. So things are going to be very busy in that regard. On top of that, we will resume our usual foreign policy conversations in this next Saturday, and I will probably be doing some more foreign policy related articles on Substack alongside the other cultural essays that I've been doing. There's been a lot more focus I want to do in regards to Substack. I want to write more, and I've been very blessed with how you guys have been supporting that. I'm very thankful. And as always, the links are down below in the description. There's no pressure, although you do make my life incredibly. It makes things easier in these economic times for certain. But it is a Saturday stream, so I thought, as we always tend to do, I'd like to end it reading from Scripture. And we'll do what we usually do, because it is important for us not to lose out on advice and things that are kind of timeless. And what I wanted to read from you all today is from Ecclesiastes, and this will be Ecclesiastes 4 through 12, or 9 through, Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. So, 2 are better than 1 because they have good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for there is not a second one to help him up. If 2 lie down together, both stay warm. But how can one stay warm alone? If one is added strength, 2 will stand before him, and a threefold cord will not quickly be broken. And power of friendship and the power of good company goes a long way. And I think that we shouldn't forget that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all very soon. We will have a video premiering on the 18th. Everyone who gets to see the really nice behind the paywall Substack essays gets to see the full thing already, but that'll be recorded and put out soon. And with that, I'll see you all here in the comment section on Twitter and all the other places that I post at, including Telegram. All the links are down below at findmyfriends.net/Prudentialist. And we'll see you all next time. God bless and take care, everybody. Stay prudent.